I don't buy the argument that some people are making that Xi Jinping is ideologically inclined not to support the private sector and consumption. He has risen through the ranks of the party in some of the most entrepreneurial parts of China, including Xiamen, where I was just a few weeks ago meeting with entrepreneurs there. His father, Xi Jinping, drove one of Deng Xiaoping's first market-oriented reform programs in Guangdong. So I think he gets this. He talks about new productive forces, and that's things like AI and batteries and EVs, almost all private companies. But he's been really, really stubborn and cautious about making the necessary changes. And so that's been frustrating. He's been stubborn and slow with a lot of things, including COVID, for example. But I think we had a turning point back at a Politburo meeting in September last year, where the rhetoric and the policies started changing. And I think that transformation has continued in recent months. It's been too slow, but I'm hoping that all of this pressure from external forces, Donald Trump, the EU being unhappy with Chinese exports, is really going to accelerate this process.
And going back to the trade negotiation, so in the beginning, China looked like it wasn't really budging. The narrative was that China is on a different stage of its economy, or on a stronger footing in 2025, so they can afford this tariff war with the United States. What are you telling your clients about that on that front, and why Beijing decided to engage anyway?
Well, I think Beijing has always wanted to engage. There was never a desire in the first Trump administration or in this one to decouple or disengage. In fact, when I was in Beijing last month, I was told that they'd been trying ever since the election, and then more aggressively since the inauguration, to engage with Trump, but they just weren't able to make that work. No one wanted to pick up the phone. No one wanted to have a meeting. So they weren't opposed to this, and it didn't take tariffs to get them to the table. And the tariffs would cause pain for China. But what I've been telling investors is the pain on American consumers and companies would be a lot greater. And I think President Trump wasn't served well by many of his advisors, who apparently didn't tell him that, in fact, American consumers will have to pay more under tariffs for things like shoes and laptops and batteries. And also that American companies would have to pay more for the intermediate goods, which account for more than half of what the U.S. imports from China. So this realization seems to be sinking in now.
Andy, listen, I mean, this is a rough train of thought, but I think you'll be able to follow along here. I mean, one obvious way to redress the trade imbalance with China is on the China side, right? If they can create enough jobs, you have a job, you make good money, then you're more likely to buy more things, invest in more things, including American goods, right? And I want to get your thoughts here on the kind of employment opportunities and job creation that the AI explosion in China could potentially bring. Because as far as I know, the last few years have been pretty lean for private capital in China, right? Private equity, et cetera. And in order to build out AI the way that Xi Jinping wants to, and he just told those folks at a Politburo meeting recently, look, I want you to double down so we can DIY on FYI. It's going to take private capital as well as, I think, increasingly state capital. But the problem there is, I mean, with state capital comes very different priorities, right? They're going to be talking about, well, yeah, but what about job creation? We need to create more jobs. And, well, yeah, where do we site these data centers? Maybe how about in this province or that province? It's going to be very different, I think, from the kind of priorities that private money would want and how they would want to see AI build out in China. What do you think?
Yeah, great questions. I think that it's extremely likely that Xi Jinping understands that the sectors that he's really focused on right now, AI, batteries, EVs, are driven primarily by privately owned companies making decisions with their own money, not being directed by the state. And I'm sure he gets that. What has happened in recent years is I think that entrepreneurs in China, remember, these are the companies that employ about 90% of the urban workforce, create all the net new jobs, all the innovation, all the wealth. These entrepreneurs have really been discouraged and disheartened by the regulatory environment in China. But I don't think this was done deliberately by Xi Jinping. I think that he was trying to solve some of the same socioeconomic problems that we're all wrestling with in our countries. Things like rising wealth inequality, unequal access to housing, education, healthcare. He just went about it in a really poorly thought out and poorly implemented way. And this ended up really discouraging entrepreneurs and crashing the property market. But we've seen since last September a reversal of those policies and a course correction. This hasn't been enough. It's been too slow. It's been too cautious and tentative, but it's been picking up pace in the last few months. I think starting with that meeting between Xi and the entrepreneurs that you mentioned earlier. And I think that process of getting confidence back among the entrepreneurs and the consumers in China is going to pick up steam now, started by the pressure from Donald Trump. I think Trump's tariff conflict is going to make China great again.
It's funny to hear that, Andy. Listen, so, you know, at the end of the day, I would agree, right? With consumers in China, it is a confidence problem. With the private sector in China, it is and has been for several years, right? A confidence problem. I don't want to get you into trouble here, but I wonder what you're telling your clients, especially about this phenomenon of private Chinese money continuing to find a way out of the country because they've lost confidence. Is that flow still continuing? Are folks still trying to get their money out?
I imagine they are, but we have to put this in context. The flow out sounds big in just raw numbers, but relative to the size of the Chinese economy, it's not very big. Let me give you a different number to put that in context. If we look at family bank deposits in China, they've almost doubled since the beginning of 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. They've gone up by almost 100%. That's a net expansion in household bank deposits in China equal to more than 11 trillion US dollars. Just for context, that's more than double the size of Japan's GDP. So yeah, some rich people have been taking their money out, looking for other ways to invest, but there's so much liquidity sitting in bank deposits. And these family deposits include a lot of really small companies that don't set up their own corporate account. So my view is a big fiscal stimulus is not really what's needed in China right now. What's necessary is for Xi Jinping to take the steps to get consumer and entrepreneur confidence back so that then they start drawing down on some of that massive increase in excess savings over the last few years and investing that in their own businesses. That starts generating more jobs. That starts accelerating wage growth. That whole virtuous cycle that leads consumers to start spending more, hopefully investing in the A-share market as well.